Bye.
Okay, so to introduce myself, I will start from my singing experience, because actually, first of all, I am a singer and dealing with contemporary music. And in the last years, I started to deal also with what they call extended techniques, and what I prefer to call extra normal voice. The aim at the beginning of my PhD was to develop something around this extra normal voice in terms of finding new methods to deal with the techniques, establish which are the main techniques that a contemporary singer should have, and also try out things directly with singers, because of course what works for me could not work for you or for another singer. It depends on the voice, it depends on the experience, it depends on the elastic components of the vocal folds and everything. So for sure part of my project will be to develop skills, not only for me, but to also leave some sort of awareness about how to do some techniques, and also trying to not destroy the voice. That's really important. My background actually is from the opera singing, and I guess that the bel canto technique is the one that let you keep a healthy voice and not destroying it. So that for me is very important to maintain also inside the extra normal voice situation. So starting from the singer point of view, then I thought a little bit about the scores that sometimes comes up with some extended techniques. So we all know that there is a problem about notation in the scores, because we have some notation that at this point is standard for some techniques. A huge contribute came from, of course, Sequenza number 3 by Luciano Berio. So some of the notation that he used for that piece from 1967, it's still used by composers. But then, as far as I know, we have a lot, 100,000 of different symbols for each sound, that it's not normal singing. And so that's another problem that I would like to develop. I've thought about, and this is with a future collaboration with the information technology department here, is to build up a sort of multimedia score for every piece involving the extended techniques, where you can click on some symbols or some sounds, and you will immediately get a video or audio tutorial explaining how you can achieve that particular sound, which are the techniques that you can use, or if you can train yourself to achieve that particular sound. Then there is the more scientific part of my project, which is to collaborate with some medical people, especially here. We get contact with the humanities lab inside the Lund University. Okay, the problem was COVID time. The lab wasn't really open for artistic purposes, but only for medical ones. So we are still waiting for that, because we are trying to study some sounds that can come out, especially in the high pitches of voice. And I'm also trying to find some new worlds of application of the extra-normal voice. So not only the world of composers and of contemporary music scores, for which I constantly collaborate with composers, but also in some other, let's say, different worlds, like new technologies as video games, for example, because actually a lot of techniques are used inside the soundtracks for video games. And also I'm trying to develop something that has to do with the virtual reality world. Another big part will be the communication of all this knowledge in terms of having workshops with both singers and composers to let them know which are the possibilities of voice. And that I already started it, having some group lessons with some classical singers from the Malmö Academy of Music. And also I presented some lessons at the Department of Linguistics in Lund, Speech and Linguistic Department, about some of the techniques that they could they could meet in their studies. So I presented something around throat singing, both from Tuva and South Africa and Sardinia, about the whistlings and high pitches, about the vocal multiphonics, and also a little bit about the overtone singing. And I both do some theoretical lessons and some workshops for them, because it's quite easy, even if you're not a well-trained singer, to achieve some techniques. There has nothing to do with normal singing. And the other aim was also to build up a sort of vocal ensemble dealing with scores involving extended techniques, but again, I couldn't because of COVID. And yeah, I guess that's it for the first year.
Well, that's already a great deal. I'd like to begin by congratulating you on your performance last night, which was really remarkable. Wonderful job. I was struck by the use of the term normal singing and extra normal voice. Perhaps since I'm a bit older and I've had to listen to all of this nonsense for many years about what is normal and what is abnormal, and whether or not what I'm doing is actually singing or not. This term sort of bothers me. Because there's a sort of, there could be for some people a kind of implicit attitude that anything that is not bel canto is abnormal. Whereas in fact, of course, we know if you look at the entire world, bel canto singing is a very small part of singing, and in most places in the world, bel canto singing is not considered normal at all. In fact, in my own experiences singing in the Amazon and in Papua New Guinea and in Indonesia and many other places, when you sing with bel canto technique, the immediate reaction is everyone laughs. And they start going, oh, and they think it's very funny. It's sort of like when we listen to Chinese, Beijing opera or something. To many people who are not familiar with it, it sounds humorous, the way that they sing, even if it's not intended to be humorous at all. So I don't know. I mean, maybe it's too soon to throw out extended vocal techniques.
Yeah, I don't know, because even the term extended vocal techniques, what does it mean? Extended from what?
Well, extended from what we're used to, in a way.
That's the same for me.
No, because normal, there's an implicit value judgment in the word normal, because the opposite of normal is abnormal, and something abnormal is deformed or wrong in a way. Whereas an extension means that you take something which is here and you extend it, you go beyond it. And you sang a piece last night called Jenseits der Sicherheit. And you know, Jenseits in German is, it's a wonderful word. I have a friend from West Berlin who refers to the east part of Berlin as Jenseits der Mauer. There's an almost biblical weight to this word Jenseits in German, which we don't have in the English word beyond. Mm-hmm. But in a sense, perhaps what we're talking about is beyond bel canto, jenseits der bel canto. I very often compare it to dance in the sense that in dance, very often dancers will begin with ballet, classical ballet techniques and doing their bar and so on. And then they learn all of these other techniques which enable them to do modern dance and contemporary dance. And I completely agree with you when you talk about bel canto as a starting point and bel canto being important for Western singers, or let's say singers in a European tradition, for having a healthy vocal production. And going beyond then, jenseits, this bel canto technique, which we all learn in conservatory. But I don't know, I think you should be careful with the word normal.
Yes, I know. I still have problems. I can't find a real word for that, because for me, in the contemporary world, we should comprehend also the other cultures. Mm-hmm. Why not? We live in a global world. So it has no sense to say Occidental way of singing, Asian one, mostly for a contemporary music singer.
Mm-hmm. Yes. You mentioned, for example, tuva and South Africa, and these are extra-European cultures. And as you know, Western composers have borrowed a great deal from musical traditions around the globe. And so, yeah, maybe we need to stop even using bel canto singing as
totally agree
as being something which is normal. But I think normal is a word in the context of singing which is sort of a red flag for me. Another red flag is natural. You often hear voice teachers talking about a certain kind of singing being natural. And again, what does that mean really? You know, you immediately contrast that with something which is not natural. Mm-hmm. And what is a way of singing which is not natural? And is singing natural at all? And when bel canto teachers talk about natural singing, my usual response is there is nothing natural about Luciano Pavarotti singing a high C. It's a highly difficult skill to acquire, which is related to something which is not about nature, but which is about art, and a certain type of vocal art in a certain historical period, in a certain cultural context. So, yeah, I think, I don't know, we have to think about what we want to call this, but extended vocal techniques, I think, is maybe not so bad, really, since we're talking again about extending something which is here. So if this is ballet, and then we extend for modern dance, and we extend even further for contemporary dance, maybe that's not so bad. So I don't know, maybe reconsider that. I wanted to ask you also if you could tell me some more about the use of virtual reality in your research, because that interests me.
So basically, I attended this festival here inside the InterArts that they had some months ago. The name was Immersive Days, and it was about the use of art in immersive landscapes, also involving the audience or the public or the people attending these performances. Not only that you go there and you assist to something, but you're deeply involved in that. And I've noticed that they work a lot with the visual thing, sometimes with the soundscapes, but only as a soundscape, So in the back, how do you call, like something guiding you or something beneath, but not really inside the thing. And actually, then I've noticed that some composers, like for example, Alexander Schubert, they use also the sound material inside this virtual reality, especially in the artificial intelligence, as part of the material of what he composes. So I guess there is also a way to use the voice, again, in some extended way, inside this world. But I still have to develop this matter.
Mm-hmm.
What I know is that if you, for example, has the glasses and the gloves for the virtual reality thing, there's nothing for the ears. So basically, what you have is, if you want to talk, it's your voice, but not a voice modified. So I'm trying to thinking about a possible use of that inside this world also.
That's interesting. Yeah, I think that's fascinating, and that's something which, at least in my experience, is really new. There hasn't been that much
Exactly.
done in this area, and there's probably a lot to be done. So I would invite you to really persist.
Yeah, the thing is, it's a very fresh thing, because actually I had contact with that only because of this Immersive Days festival. So
no, you should really persist with that and investigate that further. I think it's a very, very interesting thing to develop. I also wanted to ask if you could. You talked about throat singing, which is also referred to as diphonic singing, which is also referred to as harmonics singing, and so on. And you talked about the South African throat singing, the Sardinian throat singing, and the Tuvan throat singing. Could you briefly discuss the difference between these three types of throat singing?
sure. So this again, there is a problem of words, because throat singing actually is everything is throat singing. Everything comes from the throat. Normally, they call throat singing the one related to the kargira sound that they make in tuva, for example. And I've discovered that they have exactly the same techniques in the Xhosa region, Xhosa people in South Africa, especially the women, and in the bass and medium voice of the canto a tenore from Sardinia. The technique is exactly the same, but they use it for different purposes. So in tuva, they use it with the purpose to achieve the harmonics inside this kargira. The Xhosa singers use it as more a rhythmical pattern, because they also have more than one singer doing this technique. I don't remember the name. The name is very difficult. It's kolo with a click, kolo, something like that. And sometimes there are two singers singing with the same technique, and then somebody else is responding with a melodic singing. But usually they use it as a pattern. They just give the pulses of the, let's say, song. And they use two different pitches, more or less like one tone difference. And also they link all that with some clapping and some movements of the body, because it's all related with dance also. While in Sardinia, they use it as the fundamental tone of what the main singer makes with melodic singing, and that's also quite like the Xhosa singers, because they use it in a more rhythmical way to give again the pulses inside the songs. Of course, it depends on the songs. If they're more hilarious, more dreamy, because all the songs in Sardinia has to do with sometimes with politics, sometimes with problems of daily life, sometimes with poems of love and the night. And the funny thing in Sardinia, at least, is that the bass singer that has this basic sound, this sort of drone, he doesn't know music. So basically he just take what is more comfortable for him in terms of pitch. And it's always the same pitch for him, and that gives the other pitch for the other singers. And if you change the bass voice for some reasons, because he's sick or something, everything will change. And all the singers will be like, oh my gosh. Because that's very important. That's the core of their way of singing. It's the bass voice, the basso, what they call basso.
It's the core of all singing in any case, in every culture
Yes,
in the world.
yes.
And probably
yes,
also on other planets.
Yes,
You know.
let's say that. And they add a little bit of consonants there to give this pulse. So I'm not very good in imitating all the 3 different kinds, but the Sardinian one goes much more like bam 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 boom bam bam bam. Then the Kosa singers are more like with these very difficult patterns, rhythmical patterns, that for us speaking in Occidental music, it's something like hemiolia or something. It's very difficult to write it down. Is very confusing for us. While in Tuva they use it mostly for adding also the overtones. Or something.
Very good. Excellent.
Because again, that's an animistic culture, so they tend to imitate nature. In this case, they imitate both the bears and also some birds, or I don't know. Sometimes it's the rivers, the sound of the water, and all these things.
Yeah, very good. Thank you. Have you looked into Inuit harmonic singing at all?
Sorry?
The Inuit?
Not yet. I just know the technique where they passes the air from one to the other.
You should check that out. That's very interesting. They do sort of competitions between 2 people using yet another type of kagira sort of technique. So you should check that out as well, the Inuit.
Yeah, the interesting thing is that, not that much interesting, is sort of sad thing. The main singer in the Kosa community, that was the teacher of the, let's call it, school of this kind of singing, she died some years ago. And apparently all the other students can't carry on the school because they are not so much skilled as she was. So it seems that the culture there is sort of losing this thing.
It's very sad, which is not the case, luckily, in Tuva and Mongolia.
Neither in Sardinia.
Or in Sardinia,
Yeah, they have strict schools and sort of academies where you can learn everything, the techniques, the songs, and everything. In Tuva, I know there is a festival and a competition for Kargira
in fact,
singers.
I'm waiting to find out if it's going to happen next summer or not. They haven't decided yet, but it might happen next summer. Great. Well, thank you for that. That's very, very good, and the examples you gave were really excellent. Are you familiar with Simha Arom's book on African polyrhythm and polyphony? You should also read that, because you probably will, everything you want to know about African rhythm you'll find there. Because he notated with Western notation a lot of the rhythms that they use, the polyrhythms that they use in the Central African Republic and in Cameroon.
Yeah.
And not so much South Africa, but this would be interesting for you, I think, to investigate.
Sure.
Let's see, there was something else I wanted to ask you about. Virtual reality. Yeah, I think that's about it. Yeah. Should we open up for questions?
Does anybody have questions?
But, I mean, just to animate a little bit.
Or maybe you should speak in the microphone for
okay. Yeah.
the friends at home, the TV audience, as we used
TV
to
audience,
refer to.
yes. Yeah, just one question. I mean, it's more like an ethical question about, you know, the idea of making an archive, no, making of all these techniques and everything. So, why would you be interested in making a canon of techniques, or, and I mean, which is it's good to document, but in a way also, why don't leave this openness or this kind of freedom of interpreting music, and if we go to an ethical way, life, you know, why to establish like a certain code of rules, you know, a book of rules. But I mean, it's just to it's a question without a question, you know. It's just a comment.
No, thank you for
I think
the
it's
question.
good to, now that times are changing a lot and we are in a very difficult situation and life is changing, why keep this tradition of making archives and leaving like canonized knowledge in artistic research, which is a bit dichotomic, right?
Yeah, that's a good point, Bertrand. Thanks. The thing for me is, I mean, as far as my experience give me the sight of what the situation of singers now is, that there are contemporary music singers that continues to sing only with bel canto technique, and that for me is a problem, because at least you have to know other techniques. While the most experimental things I can see comes from other kind of music, totally. Jazz music, jazz improvisation, rock music, metal music. They have a lot of techniques that they don't even consider extra or extended or something. They're part of their normal behavior as singers. So at some point, I don't understand why the contemporary singers are stuck there in this bel canto technique. So I just want to give, you know, some material, because sometimes these techniques are like.
Yeah, can I say
that.
something? It's not building a canon or showing rules. It's simply that there are possibilities that people don't know about or have forgotten about. It's that simple, really. Yeah.
Yeah. For me, it's like, let's a stupid thing. You're a painter, but you have only red, yellow, and blue. Okay, you can make things, but then I show you, hey guy, there is only pencils, there are also acrylic, there is, you know, other things that you can use, not only the three colors there. Something like that. Just that I let you know something, but everything is inside. I mean, you don't have to go to Tuva to understand what is Kargira or, you know, whatever to understand the Buto technique of singing.
Have you seen this movie, Genghis Blues?
Yes, I've seen it.
Yeah, this is something which I would invite everyone to watch, Genghis Blues, about this American blues singer who learned to sing Kagira listening to shortwave radio and then went to Tuva. And it's really a very touching, very beautiful thing. But to speak specifically to your comment about archives, I think that it's extremely important to have archives. It's important now, it's always been important, precisely for the reason that Felicita stated, which is, for example, you have this great tradition in South Africa, which was led by this woman who has passed away, and Felicita said there is no one else who can really do this, at least as well as she could. And so if we have an archive of films of this woman and recordings of this woman, and this woman talking about how she does these techniques, then this will be preserved. And otherwise, it's gone forever. And so when you're dealing with oral traditions, which very often non-European singing is based on oral tradition rather than on musical notation, I mean, not always, but often, then the only way to preserve it is by making recordings and filming it. And the only way that we, as Western singers, can make use of this, really, is to analyze it using our own techniques and to find ways to notate it. And this is something which Simha Arom does in his book with Central African music. And this has had a very, very fruitful results, because, for example, Berio and Ligeti and Luca Francesconi, who I believe was here, all made use of Simha Arom's research and his notation of African polyrhythms in their own music. And if Simha had not done this work and made and recorded this music and notated the music using Western notation, then composers like Berio and Ligeti and Francesconi would not have had access to it. And for example, the Ligeti piano etudes, which are considered now, which are already part of the repertoire and are considered to be, I think, by most people to be some of the most important piano etudes in the history of music, are based largely on Simha Arom's research. And the preface to Simha Arom's book is by Ligeti. So this is an example of how I think this kind of archival work and this kind of research and this way of analyzing and notating music from other cultures is very, very valuable for us all.
Yeah. No, I'm all for I'm all for. I did documentaries also about Mexican instruments and with the players, because tradition is getting lost. So yeah. I'm all for that. It's just what I said was mostly on the way of performing new scores with what we call now extended techniques, like make also like a code of rules, like we should do like this, It's just a very, very tiny space between doing exactly what it says and the liberty of the performer going through this, this Benjamin quote that says the destructive character finds the wall, but the destructive character finds the little scratches inside just to move inside. And when we send, okay, these techniques should be done like this, maybe it can get straight. They can get more rigid. The chant de performance, the action performance of musicians.
I think this has a lot to do. I think there's always a certain. You're a performer yourself, so you know this. There's always a certain liberty left up to the interpreter of any notation, and a good example of notation and interpretation of throat singing is Stockhausen's work Stimmung, in which he wrote a series of vowels and transitions of vowels, but he also wrote the numbers of the harmonics that he wished to achieve with those vowels. And it's up to performers to decide if they want to focus on the vowels and on the type of technique that he describes in the score, or if they want to focus on the harmonics and how they can produce the most beautiful and most perfectly executed harmonics as he listed them in the score using the numbers of the harmonics. This is up to the interpreter, and so you don't have to strictly follow the way he says you're supposed to do the technique, which already is something which is written by someone who is not a singer. And so it's not necessarily something that a singer with a knowledge of vocal technique would describe in that way. Yeah. So, I think that this is a question, what you're saying, that has a lot to do with notation. It has a lot to do with the relationship between composers and performers. In general, when I work with composers, I don't know if this has been your experience, Felicita, or you, Mike, when you sing other people's music, but often I find myself asking the composer what he wants to hear, rather than having the composer demonstrate, especially if the composer is not a singer. Because, I mean, Mike can demonstrate his own music because he's a singer, but most composers are not singers. And so, as a result, they often will demonstrate trying to sing, and the result doesn't work, you know, and they say, well, I want you to do it like this, you know, and then sometimes, to be very provocative, I will imitate them. I say, really, this is what you want to hear? Oh, no, of course, with your voice. And I say, oh, but wait, you said that you're demonstrating it like this, so that if you say do it like this, then I'll do it like that, but I don't think that's what you want to hear. Yeah. So this has to do, I think, with the role of the relationship between performers and composers, if they're not the same person, the relationship between notation and the person who's reading the notation, and so on and so forth. But I think there's always, room for Walter Benjamin's scratches, you know, thanks to the freedom that any performer has in the interpretation of a musical score. At least I would hope so.
Yeah, I mean, because there was a polemic in France some years ago with William Christie, that he said that all music should not be performed by people that are not specialists. So this was like, like trying to canonize a way of performing old music. So this is, I think, is very wrong. And aren't we, in a way, as contemporary music performers, also trying to do these kind of things? You know, I'm not saying that what you said, that people of bel canto are still, but in a way, we should be really very careful to read between the lines of this, and don't go to this canonized, established way of performing all music or of performing contemporary music. And
yeah, this is a very interesting point. I mean, I think this leads us to the whole discussion of Wilhelm Reich, of how it actually was. Wie es eigentlich gewesen war. And in terms of early music, and of course we don't know, and Bill Christie doesn't know, and we don't know, and there's this very interesting article by Richard Taruskin called "The Pastness of the Present and the Presentness of the Past," which deals with this very subject. But when you're dealing with contemporary music, it's a bit different because the composer is there.
Yeah, of course.
It's not William Christie saying, well, this is the way Lully should be performed. Lully isn't here anymore. We're very often dealing with living composers. And, if someone is performing, as Felicita did last night, a piece by Mike Edgerton, then she can go to Mike Edgerton and say, so is this the way you want it to be? And he might say, well, no, not like that, like this. And he can even show you how to do it. And so this is very different from, and then maybe Felicita will say, but when I read your notation, I don't understand that. And, so you can get into a discussion about notation and about techniques, but you're dealing with a composer who is, in many cases, who is alive, who is there, and you can really work these issues out. And maybe the composer will say, well, I was in Tuva and I worked with Monganu Londar, and this is the way I learned this in Tuva. And so what I really want is for you to perform it the way they perform it, and here's a recording of Monganu Londar, and this is what I learned from him. But you're dealing with people who are alive, you're dealing with living traditions, you're dealing with... and so in a way, it's easier for us than it is for William Christie, because there's less guesswork involved. And so, I really think, and I also think that, I hope, that you agree, Felicita, but this is all very open. In other words, the early music world is often very exclusive. You have these people who believe that they possess the only truth. And so it's not even, well, you should only have this music be performed by early music specialists, but only by me and the people who I think are doing it the right way, not those other people. And whereas what I think we're saying, all of us who are doing research on the voice and who are performing new music and who are trying every day to learn something new, we're wide open. You know, we're not saying, well, we are the only ones who should perform new music, and you terrible opera singers, you know, should not. We're saying, let's work together. Let's learn together, and let's be part of this big family of singers, all of whom, whether we like it or not, are part of this Western, you know, European tradition of singing, because this is where we grew up, and most of us, and were trained. But let's all be inclusive. And the people who are being exclusive, I think, are usually not the new music people, but are the opera people, who are saying that what we do, what Felicita sang last night, many of them would say, this is not music. And what right do they have to get back to this ugly word, to determine what is normal and what is abnormal?
Yeah, so this is basically a need that comes from my experience also, to just let things be simpler. Because what happens every time is that I get a score, the score, it's new, let's say. I see some kind of notation, and suddenly I don't understand what the composer wants from me. Then I call the composer saying, what do you want from this? And the response is like, okay, it's a sort of screaming, you know. Well, what does it mean? I can scream in 100 different ways. So, can you explain me better? Just do whatever, but you can be more precise. So, okay, let's say that I do whatever. At some points he says, I want this more high or more low or more with some noise inside the sound. So why don't you write down it more precisely? Mm-hmm. So it's again really to try to lose less time in speaking about stupid
I mean, it depends
things.
on the composer, right? I mean, I have a lot of friends that use Mike's book, for example, you know?
Yes, but
and
voice
everybody
is always
writes
a problem.
using Mike's book just to get the thing right, you know? And how to use which part. So, I mean, of course, if you can counter a composer, say, okay, you just scream. I mean, but normally I think most of the composers try to be more precise, or as you said, you know, if they say they try to imitate, well, okay, I mean, it's not precise, but maybe this imprecision, it's not bad, you know?
I can see that with voice is very difficult. Also, they don't know a lot of techniques. So even overtone singing, that nowadays is something very simple to do, they don't know it. So they simply don't use it. And yeah, it's a problem also for high-level composers. Helmut Lachemann, he does a lot of noises and things, right? He only wrote Got Lost, that is for soprano and piano, and Tema. And when I asked him why only 2 pieces for voice, involving voice, he told me, you know, I'm very afraid of voice. I don't know how to deal with that. And also the interpreters come from the classical words, so I try to be very, let's say, classical. And that was the answer from Lachemann. So even, you know, we were talking a little before the beginning of the discussion here about also Philly Day and this kind of high-level composers. They write operas, and the voice part is always bel canto singing. So what's the problem? I mean, not saying that that's wrong.
In some cases, I think it's a choice. I think, for example, in Philly Day's case, it's a choice. It's not because he doesn't think he can find singers who can do something else. It's because that's what he wants to write. And of course, this is becoming increasingly, this is happening more and more. There are more and more composers who are writing in bel canto vocal style because that's what they want to write.
Yeah.
And so I guess they're free to do that if that's what they want to do. But as long as we all know that this is one possibility and not the only possibility, or not normal as opposed to abnormal, then it's fine. You know, I mean, if somebody wants to write bel canto singing, why not? Bel canto singing is very beautiful, you know.
I mean, one reason why I don't have a lot of symbols in my book is because, and I've heard the comment from some singers that they have to actually like study the book in order to get anything out of it. Like they can't go, it's not a quick fix. You can't go to page 26 and get a symbol and use it. It's because it's the idea that through studying the instrument at a deeper level, then you can do more things. You're freer. You have more depth and width in order to express yourself artistically, and that's why I don't have many symbols in my book, for that reason. So there are very few rules, I think, in my book that are implied at all. But it's really, and this is why some singers really hate it, because you have to read the damn thing, and you have to try to understand it. You know, it's not just okay. I remember Yehuda Yaneh. I don't know if you know Yehuda. He was a composer and is a composer in Milwaukee, professor at UWM, and he loved going to these into the University of California series, the new instrumentation books, and going and getting a cymbal. He just loved it because it was quick. He could just get back to his piece, didn't have to spend any time thinking about it. And I thought, okay. Because we had that discussion at the beginning when I started doing research for the book, and I thought, okay, this is not what I'm going to do. Anyhow.
Well, we're looking forward, Felicita, to seeing what you're going to find out and how you will help us to learn new things. There was one other thing I wanted to ask you since we were in Sweden. Have you been in touch with Sundberg at all?
No, not
you
yet.
You should. Because I think Sundberg, I mean, he's my favorite vocal researcher, number one, and he's here in Sweden.
Yeah,
and he's very open.
He's the father of all of us.
He's very open. I mean, I don't think it would be difficult for you to meet with him and discuss your work with him, and that would be another person who could help you.
Yeah, we're
knowledgeable.
We're going down that road. We're making contact through other people who are actively pursuing research right now. So I was in Stockholm, and we were discussing these collaborations with one of Sundberg's faculty colleagues, and he wanted to do work with just EGG related to normal voice. Sorry. And I thought, no, this isn't going to work for this project, because you spend a whole lot of time working on EGG and then you don't do anything with contemporary voice. So I pulled back from that project, but that was a direct connection with Sundberg.
Because Sundberg is not closed, to this
that's
sort
right.
of thing. I mean,
we've been in touch. Yeah.
Just in terms of vocal physiology and that kind of thing, I mean, I think he really knows a lot. And
absolutely.
And since he's in Sweden and you're in Sweden,
Yeah.
I mean, all the help we can get is welcome, from
sure.
competent people who know what they're doing.
I also would like to learn some techniques from here. For example, they have this way of singing in Kulning. I will at some point learn it. Why not? I'm here.
Yeah, I mean, the different techniques in the world are definitely a vast treasure for us as singers. And sometimes I tell people that my idea of a vacation is to go to some remote place in the world and hear singing that I've never heard before. And this is really so exciting.
Yeah, and also it adds something to your way of singing. Of course, you can't handle the techniques that they have since they were born, but at least something you can add to your way of normal singing.
Oh, that ugly word.
Sure.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's definitely, I mean, I think very, very often we can borrow things and from these other
Colors,
cultures.
timbres.
And I mean, it's the global village is becoming a reality. And, and it's also, I mean, we're sort of all in it together in the sense that with right now, as everyone I'm sure is aware, there's this huge climate conference going on in Scotland. And that's a good example of a problem that is our problem. It's a problem for the South Africans. It's a problem for the Inuit, even more than it is for us. It's a problem for the Tuvans. It's a problem for everyone on our planet. And so we're sort of all in it together. And, if music also becomes a global phenomenon now that we have access to all of these things, this, I think, can only be positive in helping us to understand each other better.
Sure.
Do we have any questions from Zoom? Any questions from Zoom?
Yeah, thank you. I'm just thinking about the interaction between, if you think about contemporary music today, and of your project as also a possible way of developing the interaction between the interpreter or the performer and the composer. In this respect, that in your practice, you display a way of being a performer then in integrating all these perspectives on your instrument, which are maybe not accessible immediately for all the composers. So, and that's another aspect on this catalog, or I think.
Mm-hmm.
Or how do you see yourself in this kind of picture? Like in the development of, how would we say, art music, or the music that comes out of our culture, but also incorporates or expands the perspectives, or expands on the techniques that are used and can be developed.
Okay, so I guess I place myself as a sort of link between the techniques in one part and the composers on the other. So I come to them with all my like luggage of things that I have that I carry on with me, and not saying that they have to compose using all the techniques or even one of them, but maybe they can learn something else that they can add in their compositions. Not only if you write for voice, also, because sometimes you can write for percussionists using voice. So, yes, the aim is to collaborate, but also in the newborn idea about a composition. So the very first phase of the composition, not only at the end discussing already on the notation, but maybe also before, like planning something. And, you know, we all know very clear the collaboration between Luciano Berio and Kathy Berberian. Actually, if she wasn't there, he wouldn't have written nor Sequenza nor a lot of other pieces like Visage, Circles, and, well, all the main pieces that he wrote for voice. So I guess that's very, very important. And that's very important also with other instruments. For example, in my mind there is Roberto Fabriciani that work strictly with Luigi Nono, and they could develop together things. Nobody can say which is the percentage of the amount of things that they add if it came from Fabriciani or from Luigi Nono, but then the thing is that he composed and he was the main interpreter. So this is very important right now for all these techniques.
And I think we're losing this a bit, actually. In my experience, the younger generation of composers work less loyally and faithfully with certain specific performers. And I think that this is a loss both for the performers and for the composers, because it prevents, every time you work with a composer for the second time or the third time, you build on what you learned from the relationship the first time. And I think the music becomes richer and richer. And it's unfortunate when this doesn't happen, and when a piece exists and the composer really doesn't care who plays it or who sings it. It's also unfortunate when some artistic directors, instead of asking the composer who would be the best people to sing or play your piece, they call up some agent who has no knowledge of the composer's music, maybe very little knowledge even of music at all, and it becomes a commercial transaction.
Yeah.
And this is highly unfortunate. So I would hope that all composers and all performers would try to develop this very fruitful relationship that can exist between performers and composers.
I mean, we have to find a deal, because actually we are in this strange situation where composers are only composers and they're not instrumentalists, as in the past. In the past, there wasn't the composer and the instrumentalist here. They were the same person together. And that was really, wow, fantastic. That was music. Also vocalists, because they used to sing and compose, and you can't say which part is what. Nowadays, you have really the composer that stays in their sad room, gray room, composing pieces. And then they send the score to the singer or whatever, just say, okay, do it.
But there are the big exceptions, like in Poland, Agata Zubel, who is both a singer and a composer.
Yeah, right.
Like a great composer who died recently, Frederick Jewski. If you have ever heard Frederick Jewski playing his piece Pueblo Unido, then it's an incredible experience because he wrote it and he was a great pianist and could play it probably better than anyone. And I think this is a kind of movement, actually, which is happening now, that increasingly there are composer performers, as they're referred to. And of course, as you said, before all composers were composer performers, and so it's kind of funny to even use this expression.
Exactly.
But composers are starting to perform again, performers are starting to compose again. I have a student named Sarah Grace Graves, who is a very fine composer, and she told me the other day, I want to do 70% singing and 30% composition. And I said, please don't do that because we need your music, so please see if you can revise that percentage. But she's another example, a very young woman who is both a very fine singer and a fine composer. So I think in the future we're going to have a lot more people who are composing and performing. So I think we're kind of heading back towards this pre-1900 situation when composers actually sang and composed.
Yeah.
It's also a very fruitful combination, as we know. Are there any more questions, comments?
No more questions or comments. Well, thank you for coming, and thank you for having this discussion. I think we enjoyed this very much. Let's give them a big hand, I guess.
Thanks.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks.